begins to think himself extremely important, or when he dreams at night and sees a beautiful woman enjoying with him, these are merely false dreams. Similarly, the happiness and distress caused by the material senses should be understood to be meaningless. Purport. The happiness and distress derived from the activities of the material senses are not actual happiness and distress. Therefore, Bhagavad Gita speaks of happiness that is transcendental to the material conception of life. Sukham atyantikam yathat buddhi grahyam atindriyam. When our senses are purified of material contamination, they become atindriya, transcendental senses. And when the transcendental senses are engaged in the service of the master of the senses, Rishikesh, one can derive real transcendental pleasure. Whatever distress or happiness we manufacture by mental concoction through the subtle mind has no reality, but is simply a mental concoction. One should therefore not imagine so-called happiness through mental concoction. Rather, the best course is to engage the mind in the service of the Lord Rishikesh and thus feel real, blissful life. There is a Vedic statement, Apamasomam Amrita Abhuma Apsaru Viharama. With reference to such a conception, one wants to go to the heavenly planets to enjoy with the young girls there and drink somaras. Such imaginary pleasure, however, has no value, as confirmed in Bhagavad Gita 7.23, Antavatu palam tesham tad bhavati alpamedasam. Men of small intelligence worship the demigods, and their fruits are limited and temporary. Even if by fruitive activity or worship of the demigods, one is elevated to the higher planetary systems for sense enjoyment, his situation is condemned in Bhagavad Gita as antavat, perishable. The happiness one enjoys in this way is like the pleasure of embracing a young woman in a dream. For some time it may be pleasing, but actually the basic principle is false. The mental concoctions of happiness and distress in this material world are compared to dreams because of their falseness. All thoughts of obtaining happiness by using the material senses have a false background and therefore have no meaning. Om Jnana Timirannasya Jnananjana Shalakaya Chakshurunmilitam Yena Tasmai Shri Gurave Namah Shri Chaitanya Manobhistam Sthapitam Yena Bhutale Swayam Rupa Karamayam Dadati Swapadantikam. Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhara Shivasadi Gaura Bhaktavinda Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare Hare. I offer my obeisances to my spiritual minister and to all the assembled Vaishnava devotees here. Well, there are a few things here in this purport that I was thinking of. Of course, Srila Prabhupada's transcendental ecstasies are very deep, and according to my level, I'm only seeing so much, but I'll try to share whatever I can. So the first thoughts of hearing this, for somebody who is deeply attached to material life, material senses, so-called family, friends, like that. Somebody like myself, I have deep attachments materially. So hearing this particular purport and this whole explanation, it can be a bit shocking, because the nature of the material energy is it's so attractive for a conditioned soul that one easily forgets the real position of the self as a transcendental living entity. And so the conditioned soul is trapped, or allured by the various attractions in which the external material energy of the Lord, which is divine energy, although it's temporary in its appearance. So therefore, what can seem to be so real here, Bhagavatam is saying, is, it's actually meaningless, in the sense that to see it as the all in all and take it as, something so seriously, it's not the real picture, it's not the reality, the total reality. So when someone is very attached, especially in this case to a family member who has passed away, the tendency is to really go so deep in lamentation that it almost seems like nothing else is meaningful, because that that attachment to that particular body, that relationship to that body, will no longer continue, and therefore it seems as though the whole world has ended. And here Bhagavatam is clarifying that no, the conceptions that one has based in relationship to the body and the mind, that are composed of these external material elements, these are the things that are truly meaningless, in the sense of our positioning ourselves in relation to them as the absolute. Whereas we know Bhagavatam is the Samam Bonam, it is meant for renunciation. This is the graduate study of Srimad Bhagavad Gita. And so to really appreciate Srimad Bhagavatam, we need the guidance of a self-realized soul, because from the platform of a conditioned living entity, it seems somewhat, practically speaking, impossible to apply. If somebody just hears, everything you're doing, everything you're endeavoring for, it's all meaningless, it can be quite depressing. But from the perspective of a transcendentalist, it's actually quite a relief to hear these things, because when one is either confused or suffering so much, to be told or to be giving some access to information that this experience that you're having it's not going to last forever. It's not going to, always be this way. It can be quite relieving. Of course, we hear things in Srimad Bhagavatam so many wonderful examples of personalities on the path of realizing these different aspects of, the complexities of being within the material world, and how easy it is to come under the sway of the illusory energy, to identify with it and try to either, um, enjoy or suffer. And so there are a few references Prabhupada is making in this purport. Let me go back here 1 second. So the example given here is comparing the experience of the activities of the material senses to be like that of a dream. So we've all had experience of dreams, and they can seem very real. We can experience quite amazing things or quite terrible things, depending if we're having a nightmare or not. But when we wake up, we know that, this was all just something I was dreaming while I was asleep, and now I'm awake and I move on with my, um, you know, regular life of activities. So this way, the position of the soul in relation to the, body is that the body is temporary, and so it's not really, it doesn't really have much to do with the spirit soul, um, but it's this identifying, and I thought it's pretty amazing how Prabhupada in this, purport, he's just really making it very clear about this material conception of life. And immediately, he gives the solution, which is that when our senses are purified, then, we have transcendental senses. And so when these senses that are transcendental are engaged, then, in serving the master of the senses, then that is real pleasure. And so in the material sense, we have our senses and we are feeling that we are the masters of the senses. So the whole basis of this formula is, completely false. And I was thinking how Prabhupada, a lot of times he says this misdirected civilization, that, this is unfortunate situation of the modern age of Kali is, we're bombarded with so many bad influences, you could say not so good qualities, and also the leaders are also not, godly, so therefore, um, a lot of innocent people, in the sense that they're not directly envious towards, outwardly envious like some people are, but there's quite a bit of innocent population of persons who are just following and, being carried on in further into illusion through, this propagation of sense gratification being the summum bonum, or even a step further would be giving or receiving sense gratification through the extension of the self being family or nation. And then to another extension would be this, philanthropic work, which have its, it's pious. However, if it's not in relation to service to the Lord directly. It can also be binding. For example, there are a lot of aids and help that they try to give to persons. Unfortunately, they may feed them, abominable, untouchable foodstuffs. And things are such that it's quite unfortunate, how these things go on. So, continuing through the purport here about this point of mental concoction. And so there's a whole chapter in Gita about the mind and the nature of the senses. And so specifically, Prabhupada is quoting in this purport from the sixth chapter of Gita, which is entitled Dhyana Yoga, and this is referencing the yoga principles. So this whole discussion has its base in some principles of yoga, which is, the principle is to discipline the mind. And so when we discipline the mind, then it's possible to become situated in transcendence. And Prabhupada, from the very beginning, he makes this distinction that in order to actually be situated in that platform, we have to cease from our material desires, of which the chief of all of those is sex desire. And so one who is, in the yoga process, when they're truly disciplined, they no longer become disturbed by the material desires. And Prabhupada is promoting and encouraging the instructions given by Krishna and Gita about how to do that in this day and age, which is through the practice of Krishna consciousness. In former ages, the yoga practice was, meditation, perfecting different forms of breathing and things like that. But in this age, it's Krishna consciousness. And the example is given by the example is given by King Ambarish in Srimad Bhagavatam, how one can achieve that. This from 9th Canto, Chapter 4, text 18 through 20 is quite a famous verse here. Savai mana Krishna padara vinnayor vachamsi vaikunta gunanuvarnane karav harer mandira marjanadishu shrutim chakarachyuta sat katholaye mukunda lingalaya tarshane drishau Thadpritya gatra sparshenga sangamam granam chatat padasaroja saurabe Srimad tulasya rasanam tad arpite Padav hare kshetra padanusarpane Shiro rishikesha padabhivandane Kamam chadasyena tu kama kamyaya Yathottama shloka janashrayarati. So the translation, King Ambarish first of all engaged his mind on the lotus feet of Lord Krishna. Then one after another he engaged his words in describing the transcendental qualities of the Lord, his hands in mopping the temple of the Lord, his ears in hearing of the activities of the Lord, his eyes in seeing the transcendental forms of the Lord, his body in touching the bodies of the devotees, his sense of smell in smelling the scents of the lotus flowers offered to the Lord, his tongue in tasting the tulsi leaf offered at the lotus feet of the Lord, his legs in going to places of pilgrimage and the temple of the Lord, his head in offering obeisances unto the Lord, and his desires in executing the mission of the Lord. All these transcendental activities are quite befitting a pure devotee. So, this is a great example to follow of Maharaj Ambarish. And unless we're able to fix our mind on the lotus feet of the Lord, Prabhupada is saying it's not practical to have transcendental engagement. And so that's why there are prescribed activities within devotional service, which is called archana, or engaging all the senses. So to continue to the actual verse that was quoted, which is this Sukam Antyantikam Yathat Buddhi Graham Atindriya Atindriyam. So in this particular point, the perfectional stage of trance, according to the yoga principles, Prabhupada in this explanations, he's so expertly connecting the different principles of yoga, taken according to different, you could say this perspective, from a yoga perspective, and relating it to Krishna consciousness and to Lord Chaitanya Mahaprabhu's teachings. So he quotes a lot in this particular point from Patanjali, and how Patanjali is referencing a very important point about the internal potency, or the Chit Shakti, in his Yoga Sutras, referring to the transcendental aspect of engaging oneself in that Chit Shakti, or the transcendental devotional service. And the other aspect of which people are generally drawn to, in terms of achieving some goal within yoga, or some religiosity. The word is purushartha. So this this engagement, which can refer to material religiosity, economic development, sense gratification, and ultimately one's attempt to become one with the Supreme. All of these are, they're not transcendental, but to act for the purpose of pleasing the Lord, that's a whole different platform. So sometimes the purpose of activities within within the process of transcendence, it can be mistook for these other things. Persons who are not in full knowledge, they will have a tendency to aim for these goals and not understand what is the real potency that we should be acting under in order to achieve real bliss. And so I thought it was a really nice explanation that Prabhupada gives in terms of the transcendental potency that Patanjali is talking about, and how it's by this potency that the living entity becomes aware of his transcendental position, or his constitutional position. And of course, Patanjali gives a system of how to discipline the senses, through yoga practice. Of course, as I already discussed, that this practice isn't practical in this day and age, in terms of that being it the only means, one actually has to engage in Krishna consciousness. And this is the similar process like Patanjali first describing about the senses being withdrawn from their sense objects and practicing different asanas and breathing. So Prabhupada says here that the affairs of this clearing of the senses of, you know, I understanding this misidentification, it's that Cheto Darpana Marjanam. It's a clearance stage, which is actual liberation, Prabhupada is saying. So, and I think this is a really good point for those who have some interest in yoga, and then those who don't, it's fine, because ultimately practicing Krishna consciousness is the goal here. Um, so the Maya, or the illusion, it's a nice explanation how Prabhupada describes it here. He says, Maya or illusion is the condition of spiritual life contaminated by material infection. And he clarifies that liberation from this material infection does not mean destruction of the original eternal position of the living entity. So that's the biggest fear. I feel for most conditioned entities is that the fear of, not knowing what else there is. Okay, if everything I'm doing now, according to my, material relations and body, if it's all meaningless, then what's the point? And here, Prabhupada is saying no, that our eternal position as living entities is, it doesn't end, it continues. And so, even in this very life, Krishna consciousness allows us to engage our senses, these, material senses, in a way that they can awaken our spiritual senses. And in that way, we can experience real life, which is genuine happiness in relationship to the Lord. And so, how the second part would be, okay, knowing that, we can engage our senses and purify our senses. So, this, going back to this mental concoction or mental speculation. So, we are understanding that we have to curb this concocting with our mind. And so, here we're giving, here's an example of, in this same chapter, Prabhupada quotes Rupa Goswami, how one can pursue this path in a way to engage the mind, so that we can be successful. So he gives the advice, Utsahan Nishchaya Thairyat Tat Tat Karma Pravartanat Sangatyagat Sato Vrite Sadbir Bhakti Prasidyati. One can execute the process of Bhakti Yoga successfully with full-hearted enthusiasm, perseverance, and determination by following the prescribed duties in the association of devotees and by engaging completely in activities of goodness. And then the example is given about the sparrow who loses her eggs in the ocean, and the determination for her to retrieve those eggs, even though the ocean is so great, she's determined to get them back. And by that determination, Garuda has some inspiration and compassion for such a small little bird and helps her to retrieve her eggs back. So this is the determination. And then the other part of this report that's going on to talk about the nature of one's intelligence. So first thing is the senses are connected to the mind, and then the mind is connected to intelligence as well. So what is actually directing this mental concoction towards the objects of the senses and sense gratification and all of that is the intelligence. So here, Prabhupada is giving reference to how that intelligence is like that the ones who want to go to the heavenly planets to enjoy with the young girls. So then he goes on to quote from the next chapter, which has direct relation to obtaining knowledge of Krishna, because without knowledge, then we cannot really move forward. So the unintelligent men, those with less intelligence, are being referenced as those who want to enjoy this imaginary pleasure, to go to the higher planets, and it's considered. He specifically Krishna says men of small intelligence, because their goal or their aim is very temporary, and it's not real in relation to the self. So there's different arguments that people will give in relationship to why they want to worship demigods. And of course, we can see the very example here in Bhagavatam of Hiranyakashipu, how he worshipped Lord Brahma to somehow achieve immortality by, expressing his words in a way that he felt nobody could defeat him. But obviously, even with such an amazing ability for austerity and thoughtfulness as far as requesting a benediction, still, because the demigods and um, all the planets of this material creation, they also have a temporary nature, then what they can give is limited and temporary. So it's not recommended, and it's actually condemned. This type of enjoyment is condemned because it's perishable, as Prabhupada says here in the purport. And it's very important to see the truth about this, the nature of this world, in terms of its temporary and perishableness, because to become attached to it is quite almost seemingly natural, in the sense that the material energy is far more powerful than the individual spirit soul on its own. It is insurmountable, and it's very alluring. So we constantly need to be reminded of what we are, where we are situated, so that we don't become, bound up and forgetful of what's really happening. And then I was seeing here further in this 7th chapter, there's a really beautiful verse that confirms that how we cannot understand Krishna without rendering devotional service and developing our Krishna consciousness. And this is from the 10th 10th canto, chapter 14, text 29. So kind of confirming the importance of the positive side, so that we can come out of this whole illusion. Athapi te deva padambujadvya vaya prasada lisanugrihita evahi janati tattvam bhagavan mahimno nachanya ekopi chiram vichinvan. My Lord, if one is favored by even a slight trace of the mercy of your lotus feet, he can understand the greatness of your personality. But those who speculate to understand the Supreme Personality of Godhead are unable to know you, even though they continue to study the Vedas for many years. So we can't understand the Lord, Supreme Personality of Godhead, Krishna, through mental speculation or even by just discussing the Vedic literatures. We can understand him through devotional service. And the beginning of that devotional service starts with the chanting of the Mahamantra, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Oh, Hare Krishna. My daughter just woke up. And then, of course, going back to referencing the classic contents of the Gita summarized, just to give this summary here on the nature of the body and the soul. For the soul, there is neither birth nor death at any time. He has not come into being, does not come into being, and will not come into being. He is unborn, eternal, ever existing, and primeval. He is not slain when the body is slain. So many examples are given here. And yeah, so we got about 15 minutes. If anybody would like to add or comment, please do, or reflections. No. Mm. Anybody have any thoughts or examples they would like to share? I mean, there's some nice points here. As far as practicing or realizations about how to further this understanding in a practical way. Oh, let's see here. Oh, okay, I can read the verse one more time so we get a feel for it. It is fruitless to see and talk of the material modes of nature and their resultant so-called happiness and distress as if they were factual. When the mind wanders during the day and a man begins to think himself extremely important, or when he dreams at night and sees a beautiful woman enjoying with him, These are merely false dreams. Similarly, the happiness and distress caused by the material senses should be understood to be meaningless. The usual, let me see here. Oh, Hare Krishna, thank you. So usually, I usually would use the example of the modes of nature to be a good way to kind of explain how, we're influenced by the false ego to think that we are the ones enacting the activities. We think that's the nature of the false egos, to identify which, these senses and everything are being carried out by the modes of nature. So when we can see that, um, through the help of devotees and proper association, when we can see that, then it becomes very clear that, okay, that there's obviously a greater force than myself that is moving things, and therefore how do I navigate this so that I can achieve a better result. But then here, the whole Yamaraj is directly saying, like, forget all of that discussion, because everything on that basis of, when someone is in deep illusion, to try to rationalize things in a way is just, it's very meaningless. So I was thinking of the example of, like, a child, like my daughter, for example. To her, like, she really likes to see these cartoons, which I'm not a big fan of, but she likes seeing these cartoons. So sometimes she'll watch something. Of course, I try to make it educational, according to age appropriate. Um, but the nature of the screen is that it's very it does something to the brain where it's actually quite addictive. And so, you know, from a higher perspective, it's like, wow, this is, quite, there's really no meaning to watching this stuff in reality. So, so as a parent, you're like, okay, that's enough, you don't need to continue watching this. But for the child, the one who doesn't have that full experience or knowledge, they're like, this is fun, this is great, I want to keep doing this. And um, you just gotta cut it. Because in the end it's ultimately a waste of time. So it's like it's a play, but really, from a higher perspective, you can see there's more important things that need to be done. There's more beneficial activities that will actually benefit this child than just sitting there and watching something. So I was thinking in that sense, like, from the perspective of someone who loves and cares and can see more, then it's natural to say, like, cut it. Like, there's, just stop the whole show. So that's kind of what was coming to my mind when I was hearing about how Yamaraj responded so strongly to these ladies in their lamentation. But yes, I see Agari Prabhu. Did you want to say anything, Agari Prabhu?
Oh, sorry, that was a mistaken unmute. Thank you.
Okay, yes, Taraka Prabhu.
Hare Krishna, thank you for a nice class. I'm thinking about this particular verse, and it speaks about the falsity of the various things that we experience in life. And Srila Prabhupada used to um, speak about the fact that for those who have undergone various tribulations in material life, they may come to a stage at which they seek a solution. They're tired of being buffeted about by the waves of material nature, and they adopt um, an attitude, a philosophy of believing that everything is false, the world is false, Jagat Mithya. And then you have the Gyanis, the Brahmanandis, and such who they will say Brahma Satyam Jagat Mithya, that Brahman is eternal and the universe is false. Srila Prabhupada explains that that's not our position. We don't say that it is false. It is coming from Krishna, so therefore it's not false. Not false, but it is temporary. Um, and for the so we don't want to make the mistake of getting caught up in that sort of a mentality. It's kind of a false shortcut uh, to liberation from material bondage. It doesn't really work. But so we don't want to make the mistake of thinking that the Jagat is Mithya. It's not Mithya, but it's temporary. For the devotees, however, temporary or otherwise, it can be utilized um, in a constructive way. Devotee learns how to utilize everything in Krishna's service, and even the temporary manifestations of the material nature have practical application in devotional service. There are countless ways in which we can engage all of what we find everywhere around us, and within us as well. Um, our bodies and our minds are also a part of that temporary material manifestation. All of that can be engaged in Christian service. Um, and Temporary though it may be, there are also some ingredients that are real. It's actually a mixture. The material nature is also impregnated with countless living entities who are not false. They're not of the nature of the the, the illusory living entities we encounter in a dream. You know, man dreams of a woman. The woman has no basis in reality. It's a concoction, a creation of the mind. The subtle body has created this impression, but that woman is not real. She doesn't actually exist. There isn't actually a spirit soul there. Um, or at least not necessarily. Sometimes one encounters actually real living entities within dreams, but generally dreams are just a fabrication of the mind. And but in our waking life, we experience other living entities. There is actually a real person there, or a an actual living entity, uh, part and parcel of Krishna, is actually there. So, as devotees, we don't want to write off the entire material nature and all that it encompasses as simply false or even as temporary. There are also elements within the material nature that are not temporary. The living entities are not temporary; they are eternal. And um, it may be fruitless to be caught up in attachments to the various elements we encounter in material life, but it needn't be that way necessarily. We can even our attachments can be dovetailed in Krishna consciousness, at least initially, while we are undergoing purification and overcoming our anartas. One may be attached to one's child, for example, and the child is real. The child's body is temporary. The child's mind is temporary, but the actual living entity there is real. And we may have an attachment for our child, um, and and that may be um, a mistake, and it may be fruitless, but we can make it fruitful. We can dovetail that attachment by directing it to in such a way that we are compelled to cultivate Krishna consciousness in our child. Then it becomes very real and practical and productive. Um, we can have compassion for all of the countless fallen souls that are caught up in the material nature. They're everywhere around us, and we can utilize our temporary material bodies and our temporary mind to try to benefit those fallen souls, to try to help them somehow or other, giving them some little taste of Krishna consciousness through some means or other, helping them to make progress. So devotees do not accept this philosophy of Jagat Mitya. We will have nothing to do with that. We understand that it's temporary, but we utilize everything somehow or other in Krishna's service. Krishna's interest is to see that every living entity is uh, is freed from the miserable condition of illusion in material existence and reunited with him. So, and the devotee's interest is to mitigate Krishna's anxiety for the welfare of the fallen conditioned soul. So, there's lots of work to do, and um, it's short-sighted and one could say selfish to just simply regard the entire uh, material manifestation as false and just have nothing to do with it. We don't do that. We interact with the material nature. We interact with all the living entities there. We try to benefit everyone. And in the course of trying to do that, we also benefit ourselves. So it's a wonderful thing. Lord Chaitanya's movement is uh, wonderful in that way that um, automatically, um, simply by trying to help others to progress in the spiritual life, we ourselves also make advancement without even endeavoring separately. Um, the example is sometimes given that if you um, try to help someone to cross the street, um, you also wind up on the other side of the street by that endeavor. So, preaching Krishna consciousness is a wonderful thing. Anyway, those are some of my thoughts. Hare Krishna.
Hi. Thank you so much, Prabhu, for those final words. And wish everyone a happy Krishna conscious day. We'll end the class now. Grantaraj Srimad Bhagavatam ki.